Hey everybody, it's Drew, aka Public Enema. 2023 is coming to a close, and there have been some fantastic games released this year. I mean, RPG fans ate very well. Everyone's doing their top games of 2023 list, and I thought I would do mine with a little personal spin. And these are the 8 best games that I beat for the first time this year. So there's a mix of new releases and also games that have been sitting on the backlog for a while. But anyway, let's get into it. First game on the list is Theatrhythm Final Bar Line, which I primarily played on my Nintendo Switch. This game came out in February, and it dominated my Switch for a good 2 months. One of my favorite elements of the Final Fantasy franchise is the music, and here's a game that has the bulk of the music from pretty much every game in the franchise, plus some extras like Xenogears and Octopath Traveler in the form of DLC. I loved being able to form parties with a mix of my favorite characters from each game. Fighting a boss battle against Gilgamesh from Final Fantasy V with a party of Ramza, Terra, Vivi, and Y'shtola should be weird, but this game absolutely makes it work. And the Switch's portability is perfect for the game. I found myself grabbing it anytime I had a few minutes of downtime, but didn't want to dive headfirst into a story-heavy RPG. Theatrhythm caught me by surprise. I had actually planned on skipping it until I tried the demo on the Switch eShop, and I'm so glad I picked it up. It's the perfect celebration of all the things that make Final Fantasy special, focusing on the music and the history of the series. Continuing with our trend of hard-to-say game names, next up is Utawarumano, Prelude of the Fallen, and I'm still not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. This game has been in my backlog for years, and I finally got around to playing it. In this game, you follow the story of Haku, a man who wakes up in a rural village with no memories and a strange mask affixed to his face that can't be removed. And although it starts with such a common amnesia trope, the story that follows is one of the best I've come across in the medium. Outside of 13 Sentinels Aegis Rim, I haven't really played a ton of visual novels, but this one weaves in segments of strategy RPG gameplay that does a really good job of breaking up all the story-heavy segments. The battles are pretty easy, but they accomplish their job in giving a nice change of pace quite well. Few games can boast the level of world building contained within Utawarumano. You spend so much time getting to know the characters that it really makes some of those heavy story beats hit like an absolute truck. This series is probably second only to Trails games in making its in-game universe feel actually lived in, and I don't say that lightly. If you can stomach its slower pace, you'll be rewarded with an amazing story full of twists and turns that will keep you coming back for more. My main takeaway is that I should probably play more visual novels. Originally released in Japan back in 2012, The Legend of Nayuta Boundless Trails finally made its way west this year. Nayuta isn't your typical Trails game. It's not turn-based, but it's an action RPG more similar to a PSP-era Ys game. In Nayuta, you explore several areas broken up into bite-sized zones that each maybe take 5 minutes to complete. Nayuta handles the weapons while his fairy companion Noi launches magic attacks. It makes for a pretty easy to pick up battle system, and new additions to combat are drip-fed throughout the game so nothing ever feels very overwhelming. The game's story is pretty good, full of some very likable characters and accompanied with another outstanding soundtrack from Falcom sound team JDK. The best part of Nayuta? It's a standalone Trails title. You can jump into the game with zero knowledge of the Trails universe and still have a good time. You don't need to play 9 other games to be able to figure out what's going on here. There's been some hinting from Falcom that The Legend of Nayuta may connect to this main series down the line, but for now, it's a delightful, short adventure full of engaging combat, memorable boss battles, and music that'll get stuck in your head for days. Next up on my list is Cosmic Star Heroine from Zeboyd Games. I did a full Let's Play of this game on the channel and had a blast with it. Being a fan of RPGs means I play so many long games that can push upwards of 80 to 100 hours or more, and I've started looking for shorter experiences to break up these 100-hour epics, and Cosmic Star Heroine is a great example of a short RPG palate cleanser. Plus, it's an RPG in space, we need more of these. Also, I'm a sucker for a main protagonist that fights with a bow staff, like the main character from Seokiden or Estelle from Trails in the Sky. Cosmic Star Heroine has a battle system that never gets old. There is no standard attack option, but rather 8 abilities you equip onto each character. And as you can only use most abilities once, and unless you spend a turn resting to restore it, you're kind of forced to pick something else each turn. This allows for a pretty strategic battle system that makes you line up your character attacks with supporting buffs and debuffing the enemy to efficiently take down enemies. Cosmic Star Heroine has a large cast of characters to choose from, and each has their own unique set of abilities. I think I grabbed this game on sale for something like $3, and it's more than easily returned my investment in it. It's certainly not an epic story that can compete with the likes of Final Fantasy, but the sum of all of its parts make it a really fun and charming bite-sized RPG that I'll find a reason to return to again and again. Surprisingly, up until this year, I've never actually completed The Legend of Dragoon. I remember playing it several times as a kid on the PS1, but I'm not convinced I ever made it past a particular pain-in-the-ass boss at the end of Chapter 2. When Sony released The Legend of Dragoon out of nowhere back in February, I knew it was time to try beating this classic once and for all. And the game was a mess at first, random crashes and the inability to actually use Dragoon magic, which, you know, is a big part of the game. But once Sony patched out the issues, I ended up having a great time with Dart and friends. The game hasn't aged particularly well visually, and has some outdated game mechanics. I'm looking at you, inventory management screen. And the translation is also a little rough, but kind of charming in the way that is very reminiscent of how a lot of the PS1 era RPGs at the time sounded. Negatives aside, the story and cast of characters hold up very well. In its effort to be a Final Fantasy VII killer, Legend of Dragoon took some chances, most notably with the battle system. But I'd say they paid off. The Edition battle system never feels dull, and I'm not gonna lie, I used Rewind quite a bit while trying to master these new additions. Also, the Dragoon transformations and battles still feel very special. I'm so glad Sony released Legend of Dragoon digitally this year. I probably never would have gone back and finished it otherwise. And hopefully this means Sony has plans for the franchise, and maybe we'll finally get that sequel. It may have taken me 20 years to finally beat Discs 3 and 4, but it was well worth the wait. Trails into Reverie is the ultimate culmination of the Crossbill and Cold Steel arcs. It's a love letter to the 9 games that came before it, in a way that Trails in the Sky III was meant to be the swan song of the Liberal arc. It's filled with fan service and meant to serve as a bridge into the next era of Trails games with an eye towards the Calvard Republic. Reverie has a huge cast of characters and does a great job of mixing and matching parties from both Crossbill and Erebonia. I'll never get tired of exploring a fully 3D version of Crossbill. With all of that said, I wish I could put this game higher on the list. Reverie is far from perfect. The story reasons contrived to bring this all-star cast together is flimsy at best, and I don't feel like it adds much to the overarching story of Zemuria. The game also suffers from some major pacing issues, with the main story grinding to a halt in order to explore the game's Reverie Corridor dungeon. With that being said, the battle system is still great, the characters are still lovable, and the soundtrack is still amazing. Some of the extra scenes you can unlock after completely finishing the game set up the Calvin arc of the series in a great way. Trails Through Daybreak can't get here fast enough. It says a lot about my Trails fanboyism that Reverie is probably my least favorite Trails game, but still number 3 on this year's list. I loved my 80 or so hours spent on the game and can appreciate how it was meant to bring closure to a segment of the series that means so much, while setting an eye towards the future. It's a game I'm glad I played, but likely won't be returning to anytime soon.
So I'm going to pause the main countdown here for a minute for a couple of honorable mentions that missed out on this list on a technicality. They probably would be number 2 and 1 respectively if I hadn't already played them before, but let's take a look. Trails to Azure was originally released in 2011, but it wasn't until this year that it finally came west in an official capacity. I mark this as an honorable mention for one reason only, and that's because I've beaten it already. I played the Geofront fan translation as soon as it was available back in 2021. And I use fan translation very loosely. This is very much a professional grade product. So much in fact that NIS used it as the basis for their translation for the official release. Simply put, I love this game. To me, this is the pinnacle of the Trails series. Something about taking a small cast and restricting the game to a relatively small geographic area makes this game truly special. By the time you finish the duology, you almost feel like you know the special support section personally and have spent some real time in the city of Crossbill. Few games have impacted me the way Zero and Azure have. So yeah, it's an old game that I've beaten already, but it's one that I assumed that it would never get an official Western release. I'm so glad it's available to all the console players out there who otherwise may have had to skip this entry or just watch a Let's Play on YouTube, and that would just hit differently. So, thank you to the Geofront, and thank you to NIS for using the Geofront translation for getting this game to so many new people. This year, I had the joy of introducing Mrs. Public Enemy to Final Fantasy IX, which is my favorite game of all time. We played through it together over the span of a few weeks, and I'm happy to report that she loved every minute of it. While she was playing the Switch version of the game, I took the opportunity to try running the Maguri mod on my Steam Deck, and I was so blown away by the upgrades. I felt the need to start a second playthrough so I could document the changes in the form of a Let's Play for the channel. Until we get that long-rumored remake of Final Fantasy IX, then the Maguri mod is the definitive way to play this PS1 classic. The game looks so good with this mod running. The backgrounds look crisper, the character models are enhanced, and even movie cutscenes have been improved. Also included are some major quality of life upgrades that I didn't know I needed, such as the steal command always being successful. Sure, it's a cheat, but man did I appreciate not having to grind steals against every boss in the game. Also, it may seem minor, but after years of being absolutely worthless, the Thunder Slash glitch has been fixed and the ability is actually useful for Steiner again. I could talk all day about Final Fantasy IX, so I'll end with this. The Maguri mod is the perfect excuse to play this amazing game again. Final Fantasy XVI was a major departure for this storied franchise. Combat felt more like Devil May Cry than Final Fantasy, and as a turn-based aficionado, I was worried. However, those concerns ended up being pretty unwarranted. What resulted was a game with a fun and fluid battle system that accompanied a dark and moving story, and the ability to mix and match different icon-based skills allowed for a high degree of experimentation and customization. I was tinkering to find my favorite set of abilities up until the very last dungeon, and found myself chasing down every extra hunt as it became available. The true highlight for me was the music and story. Masayoshi Soken delivers one of the best scores to date, with the highlight being To Sail Forbidden Seas. I know many were turned off by 16's relentlessly dark approach to storytelling, but it just clicked with me. Clive's quest for revenge and redemption captivated me from the get-go, and 16 sucked me into the game world in a way that I haven't felt in a Final Fantasy probably since Final Fantasy X. I'll acknowledge that 16 had some shortcomings, namely being the side quest. Many of them felt like glorified fetch quests and majorly disrupted the pacing of the main story that I really couldn't wait to get back into. Some side characters felt underdeveloped, and some of the antagonists could have used much more screen time in my opinion, but ultimately, the positives of Final Fantasy XVI bring far outweigh the bad. Regular combat felt incredibly satisfying, especially when you string together a lethal combo attack utilizing the different iconic abilities. And the big icon boss battles were just jaw-dropping, and I hadn't really experienced anything like it, and it had me sitting on the edge of my seat the entire time. Also, did I mention you can pet the dog? I would run through a wall for Torgal, and I'd dare anyone to stop me. With the new DLC releasing for Final Fantasy XVI, I'm really looking forward to returning to the world of Valisthea once more. My favorite game that I completed this year is Sea of Stars. I didn't think anything was going to top Final Fantasy XVI, but I've really loved my time with Sea of Stars. I was already anticipating its release, but I couldn't wait to get my hands on the full game after getting a taste of the demo back in February. And I'm so glad that the game did not disappoint my expectations. This game has so much going for it. The art direction is gorgeous. The environment backgrounds are some of the best I've seen, and the pixel art for the characters are great too. Eric W. Brown crafted an amazing soundtrack, with each area's theme seeming to match it perfectly. All of his battle themes are absolute bangers, with Encounter Elite pretty much running on repeat on my Spotify for me this entire year. Plus, Yasunori Mitsuda being involved with the music is always a good thing. Whenever this OST gets released on vinyl, it's an easy day one purchase for me. The battle system is engaging in a way that makes you really use every character and all of their abilities to ensure you're breaking the locks placed on enemies and interrupting their actions. And another highlight is the minigame Wheels. I found myself challenging Wheels champions over and over again just for fun, and I would 100% play an arcade version of Wheels if Sabotage Studios ever decided to develop it. Now, I will acknowledge that Sea of Stars isn't perfect. The story is probably the weakest element of the game, and that can be a pretty hard sell when usually the number one thing that an RPG fan is looking for in a game is the story. The story is pretty average in the beginning, but it does improve greatly as the game goes along with some unexpected emotional beats that I won't spoil here. Valir and Zale aren't the strongest written protagonist I've ever seen, but they're likable enough to move the story along. Ultimately, Sea of Stars is a game that's greater than the sum of all of its parts. The music, battle system, and setting combine to form the building blocks of a standout, bite-sized RPG adventure that oozes charm. I don't typically trophy hunt, but I found myself chasing down the Platinum Trophy for this game anyways. And even though I've done everything there is to do in this game, I'm really looking forward to diving into Sea of Stars again soon. Sabotage Studios has made a strong case that turn-based RPGs aren't dead, and can actually thrive when they're given the love and attention shown here. Okay, so I managed to make this top 8 games I beat this year and backdoored into a top 10 list.
That title, you're sexy.
Of the best games I beat in 2023. There's a lot of games released this year I didn't get to, like Octopath Traveler 2, or Baldur's Gate 3, or, insert your favorite game that I didn't get to in this list. But these are 8 that I finally knocked off. There's a decent mix of new releases and ones that have been sitting on my backlog, in the case of Legend of Dragoon, for 2 decades. So I'm really looking forward to next year. There's a ton of great releases coming out, but I'm going to knock a few off my backlog as well. But anyway, thanks for watching, and be sure to let me know in the comments down below what's the best game you beat this year.